Good evening, everybody. Fantastic to see so many people registering again for this really innovative series of webinars that the LOETB have put together, and they're really continuing in that pursuit of absolute perfection, and two fantastic speakers lined up today again. It's a different time of evening, so you're very welcome, anybody who has been with us throughout the series so far. Good news is the series will continue into the new year, and we're going to take the same format again. So in a couple of minutes time, Aideen Poole from the LOETB is just going to give us a quick overview of another part of the services that the LOETB offer. At about 20 to 5, our keynote speaker, Barry, will be here to bring us his piece as well. You have noticed from the title of today's webinar, COVID-19 is not a disruption, it's an accelerant. That is just a hint of what Barry is going to cover, and some of the language and words that he's going to use throughout his speech will be, they'll make you think deep and think differently about your business. I think even the title itself, it has gotten people's attention and made people sit up and think about the year that has been and maybe the year that's coming as well. So we're very much looking forward to Barry's piece around 20 to 5. As always, we invite questions from all of you participants. You can use the Q&A function right at the bottom of your screen. Just click on it, put your questions through, the team will get them across to me, and I'll put those to Barry at the end of his piece. At about 5 to 5, we'll be joined by Dr. Anne Cusack of Critical Healthcare, now based in Tullamore, and they were established in 2000 by Anne and Seamus Riley. Critical Healthcare, it's become one of the leading specialist providers of frontline medical and healthcare products. It's been another year of great growth and expansion for the company, so we're really looking forward as well to hearing Anne's story. And we found as well that bringing the case studies into this has been really successful and a very popular feature. A couple of quick pieces of housekeeping. We will be recording the session, but because it's done as a broadcast, the only people who will be visible on screen are actually the presenters or the people speaking. So you won't be able to turn your cameras on. So there'll be no issues there around that. Pieces of the webinar will be made available on the LOETB social media later as well for people to look back on. So other than that, I think it's time to sit back, relax, and to begin, I'd like to introduce Aideen Poole from the LOETB.
Thanks a million, Ronan. And welcome everyone to the second webinar in the second series of Future Proof Your Business. So as Ronan mentioned, we have been running this series ongoing since September. And I suppose from our perspective, we wanted to provide a support in any way we could to enterprises and bring in as much key speakers with valuable insights as we could. So we started off the series with kind of a 5-week plan in mind, and we carried it out every week for a couple of weeks. And due to demand, we were looking at the numbers today, and we started off with kind of very little awareness of what was going on. And as the weeks continued, we've just grown in numbers, and it's great to see that every week we're just gaining more and more attendees and more insights, and they have contributed then to further programs that we've started to develop and look into for attendees and for enterprises in the region. So on the back of that, we have decided to continue the Future Proof Your Business series, and we will be doing one a month. So going forward, I suppose, as Ronan said, keep an eye on our social media platforms. We have the recordings of all the previous ones if you'd like to have a look, and all the links to register for the next ones will be posted there as well. So in the LOETB, we work for our enterprises, and supporting enterprises is our main goal within our team. So as I said, with the webinars especially, we have started to kind of facilitate different programs. We have even ran even different workshops that kind of delve deeper into specific elements of the initial webinars, like for example, the social media. So we ran the social media webinar series with Muriel Foley because she got great feedback on the day, and it was just to kind of have a bit more deeper insight into that specific area. So we will continue to do that as long as the demand is there, and it's very visible throughout these webinars where the demand is, where the kind of lack of skills are, and we're there to support you in any way we can. But throughout the ETB, we have 3 teams within enterprise support. We have apprenticeship services, traineeships, and skills to advance. So I will pop up our contact details there just so you have them. We can kind of facilitate any sort of meeting if you don't know what kind of service is for you. We can have a chat with you and see and point you in the right direction if you're gone wrong. But I suppose just to keep an eye as well on our LinkedIn page, we do post any upcoming courses, and in the new year we'll be running the likes of supervisory management, personal and professional development. Digital marketing is another one that has been of great interest and demand. So it's just to keep an eye out there, and we will be promoting them throughout the webinar series. But that's pretty much all for me. If there's anything we can do to help or support, you have our email addresses there that's on screen. And I just want to say a huge thank you. The webinar series wouldn't be what they are without the expertise from the guest speakers and our case studies as well. And thanks a million to Ronan for facilitating this. So I hope you gain a lot from today and use the chat function to ask as many questions as possible and just enjoy. So thanks a million, everyone.
Brilliant. Thank you, Aideen. And it's just great to hear as well how the LOETB are reacting to the feedback from the webinars and actually going and turning those into education programs too. That's fantastic. So folks, without further ado, just to reiterate, as Aideen says, the Q&A function there, put your questions through. And remember, there are no wrong questions. There are no stupid questions. Feel free. It's only us that can see them. We'll gladly put them towards the panelists. So to begin, I'm going to just give a quick introduction to a man. Actually, if I was to read the full bio, we be here for the next half hour. And just to put in context, that I think the last webinar Barry did a day or two ago was for Harvard University. So we're delighted to have Barry with us this evening. But he works with business leaders and teams from global organizations that seek to invent the future, not fear it. Every day, Barry helps with the world's leading companies, from disruptive startups to Fortune 500 behemoths, helps them to break the vicious cycles that spiral businesses towards debt by enabling culture of experimentation and learning to unlock the insights required for better decision making, higher performance and results. Barry is the author of Unlearn, Let Go of Past Success to Achieve Extraordinary Results, and the co-author of the international bestseller Lean Enterprise, How High-Performance Organizations Innovate at Scale. His list goes on as well. So without further ado, I think that the topic, the heading itself is one that grabs the attention, that COVID-19 is not a disruption, it's an accelerant. I'd like to introduce Barry O'Reilly.
Cheers, Ronan. Thanks very much. So yeah, it's great to be here, and always pleasure to do some talks for folks home in Ireland. I'm here in San Francisco, and it's a nice, obviously won't be traveling home this year, so this is as close as I'm going to get to say hello to folks. So thanks for having me. I'm going to start even though further back in actually 1918, like the influenza pandemic known as the Spanish flu was the most severe pandemic in human history. So 500 million people, or a third of the world's population at the time, were actually infected by the virus, and at least 50 million people are estimated to have died from it now. So it's always fun in the chat. Just does anyone know why it was called the Spanish flu, out of interest? I always like to ask this question, just a little bit of a pop quiz. Any idea? I can throw a few suggestions in the chat. The interesting part is it was 1918. We're still in the grips of World War I, and there was a lot of censorship of information, actually. Germany, the US, Europe, they weren't sharing information, but Spain was a neutral country. And the King of Spain actually contracted the illness, and their newspapers reported about it, even though the virus had sort of been traveling around for many years. So that's the reason it became the Spanish. It didn't start there. They were just the first people to talk about it. So I think it's fair to say that we're all sort of experiencing a disruption at the moment. And you know, for people who work in technology or product innovation, disruption is not really a new theory. But when you think about the largest organizations in the world, even 20 years ago, it was all about being as big as you can, get number one in your market, build a boat around your business, you know, like scale through people. And even like 20 or 10 years after that, it was still sort of very much the same. Nothing really was changing until really everything changed. And today, Apple is the first $2 trillion company. Jeff Bezos is probably, you know, wealthier than any person we've ever known. But these organizations, the reason they've become so valuable is that they're not scaling through people, they're scaling through technology. They're building platforms that allow them to rapidly synthesize, analyze huge data sets, and understand and anticipate customer behavior before it even happens. And they've smaller groups of people, you know, and when you think about the capabilities that are in people's hands to both learn what works and unlearn what doesn't, this is what has really helped them sort of accelerate. And while the price of oil drops to zero in some instances, and ExxonMobil, General Electric sort of disappear, and it gives you a sense of how quickly the world is changing. And yet the world changes, and we seem to say very much the same. You know, many leaders believe the things that made them successful in the past will be the things that make them successful in the future. They have a very linear mindset about how change happens. And yet innovation actually happens much more on an exponential curve. Technologies or tools that initially often look deceptive. Cloud computing is a very simple example of this, right? You know, 5 years ago, most people would not even have dreamed of using AWS, but today, Capital One, a financial services bank in the United States, has all of their infrastructure housed in Capital or in AWS, which is sort of unheard of for a bank in a highly regulated industry. So the companies that sort of get on these waves early are the ones that really accelerate through these sort of scenarios. But many leaders get trapped on the same behaviors that made them successful in the past. They don't move or adapt as their market changes. And this is the gap that happens. So I often say COVID is not a disruption. It's an accelerant. We've accelerated in remote working maybe 10 years in the last 10 months. And the companies who have built resiliency and responsive systems like Capital One, move their infrastructure to the cloud that they can rapidly launch and release products, are accelerating because they're building new products. They've got resilient systems. And yet many organizations who have not anticipated for flexibility, responsiveness, have really struggled through this sort of scenario. And many people have, because most people only know how to manage in person. They've not managed people remotely before. So I often say that disruption actually doesn't really apply to organizations. The truth is it applies to individuals. People's behavior is what's being disrupted at the moment. You're being asked to do uncomfortable things that don't feel natural to you, and that's tough. You know, and I often say that while products have features and you've got to constantly innovate the features of your product for it to stay relevant in its market, humans have behavior. So if you're not constantly innovating your behavior to adapt to your market, that's sort of where you get the gaps. And this was really interesting idea to me, you know, as I started to sort of dig into this idea of both learning, but more importantly, unlearning. I came across this reference from Bo Henberg in 1981. And, you know, what he would say is that as our knowledge grows simultaneously, other knowledge becomes obsolete as the reality changes. So really understanding involves both learning new knowledge and discarding misleading or obsolete knowledge, things that no longer matter. And you know, your computer in front of you operates like this. Depending on the task, it loads up certain information to execute that task. And as it changes tasks, it's constantly loading and unloading. Yet we tend to only talk about learning or learning more, or not understanding what lessons are to be unlearned or let go of. And that's probably the skill is about recognizing really truly when to adapt. So the way, you know, when I even speak to people about unlearning, a lot of people get upset. They think that I'm saying that everything that they know is wrong, and nothing could be further from the truth. Now, the way I describe unlearning is it's a system. It's about recognizing it's a process of letting go, reframing, or moving away from once useful mindsets and acquired behaviors that were successful in the past, but now limit our success. So it's not forgetting, discarding, or removing knowledge or information. It's the conscious act of letting go of outdated information and making space for new information to come in to inform your decision-making and action. And you know, so sometimes when I start to talk to people about this, they ask me, well, how do I know what I need to unlearn? And there's a couple of questions I often ask people, and maybe if you have a bit of paper, you might write this down and give you a bit of a sense to focus on. And so can you think of a situation where you're not achieving the outcomes that you desire? Maybe you're not living up to the expectations that you have for yourself. Is there situations that you're struggling to resolve, or a challenge that you're avoiding altogether because you just can't deal with it right now? Or maybe you've tried everything that you can think of and you're still not getting the breakthrough that you're aiming for. So not living up to your expectations, not getting the outcomes you're aiming for, a situation you're avoiding or struggling with, or you've tried everything you can think of and you still can't get a breakthrough. These obstacles are all signals that your existing behavior is not working and you need to adapt it. And so, hopefully you'll see those questions and write down, maybe not one, but you'll find 2 or 3 things. And that's very much what happens when I talk to people about this. And what I discovered really about it is once you can start to diagnose areas you need to unlearn, obstacles are feedback mechanisms to tell you your behavior is not working. But what we're really trying to do is reframe not the obstacle we want to solve, but the outcome that we really want. And that requires us sort of envisioning the future that we're trying to create. And once you can start to think big about what you're actually trying to create, it's then about starting small and relearning new behaviors, getting outside your comfort zone to get the breakthroughs that you're looking for. And this is sort of like not a one and done process. It's a system, and the more you practice it, the better you get. And I'll share a couple of examples today of some of the companies that have really sort of shone in this space. And people often ask me, well, where do I start when I'm trying to unlearn? And even some of the challenges you might have written down could be, oh, we need to change the culture of our company, or we need to change the way we fund ideas in the government, or and they're big problems. It's important, but if you think big and start big, you get slow feedback loops and it's difficult to make progress. So I always say think big, start small, and learn fast. So when you're starting to unlearn and you want to change the culture, think about your impact on the culture, how you could role model different behaviors. And one of my sort of favorite examples of this is Christian Metzer, who was on my podcast, and he's the CIO of Volkswagen Financial Services. And often people would say to him, oh, it's very easy to be a CIO, sit around meetings all day. You don't really have to do anything. So based on that, he said, well, why don't I let someone else be the CIO for a day so they can understand what it's like to do my role, and I'll sit back and I'll observe, how people react when I'm not in that role. And that's what he did. He held a competition. People could apply to be the CIO for a day. An engineer won the lucky prize, and they got to be him for a whole day. And he followed them around in meetings, let that engineer make the decisions, experience the challenges that it actually involves in being there. And halfway through the day, they had a major outage and their site went down. And he still sort of persisted with the engineer acting as the CIO through that process. So this is just like a great way of role modeling unlearning in yourself. Because as you do that in yourself, you start to inspire your teams, and your teams can start thinking about how you can unlearn together, right through to sort of changing your sort of organization to sort of get there. Right, so I just wanted to share, like maybe in the sort of next 5 minutes, a couple of sort of areas that I think are important to cultivate. And then I'll just give a couple of cool examples, I think, of people who've done this really well, especially through the pandemic period. So the number one thing you need to cultivate in yourself if you're trying to unlearn is really curiosity. And whenever I ask people, are you curious? I've really never had anyone say they are not. And yet, people's behavior is often very opposite to that. Classic example is if I asked you, what happens when you give someone more junior than you a task to do that you know how to do, and then they start trying to solve it in a different way, what's your natural reaction? Now, most people smile and they're like, oh, they're obviously doing it wrong. And that's a sort of classic way that we shut ourselves down from new information. Another one of my favorite examples of this is Joe Narenya, who's the COO of HSBC's Global Markets. He was on my podcast as well and talked a lot about even the COO of Global Markets for HSBC would sit down with the graduates every year when they came into the company, and he would give them sort of problems to work on that he was working on, to see what techniques and tools and technologies that they would use to try and get there. And you can imagine in a company like that, the artifact it creates when some of the most senior people sort of are working with the most junior people to learn from them. And the next one is ownership. So if you're not getting the results you're aiming for, what's your natural reaction? Is it to blame the team, the other person, or think about what you contributed to that? If you're not losing the 5 kilos, is it the chocolate bar's fault? Probably not. So, these are some of the things that are really important. Commitment is about doing things that you're going to suck at. Initially, you're going to struggle in new skills as you try to learn them, but you've got to commit to it and then commit to trying harder and harder practices to get better. And that means being comfortable with getting uncomfortable, getting outside your comfort zone with new skills, new behaviors, new ways of working that you've never done before, and that needs safety. And we get there is safety is about thinking big but starting small. And small is powerful because small steps create psychological safety, that you can make mistakes in front of peers and recover. It's physical safety of small steps or safe to fail experiments, recoverable situations, or economic safety where you're only taking small risks, small investments to learn what works and what doesn't. And that's very much the mantra of this book. And the way I work is always thinking big about the outcome that we're trying to achieve, but actually starting small to explore new behaviors, methods safely, so you can learn fast what works for you and what doesn't. So just a few examples of things that probably need to be unlearned, especially when you think about COVID as an accelerant rather than a disruption. And the first one is actually you need to act. When you face uncertainty, most people try to stop. They hit the brakes, they pause. And so many businesses during the pandemic have stopped investing, stopped doing things. They're in shock. And that's the worst thing you can actually do. The counterintuitively, the way when you face uncertainty is not to stop, to pause, to wait and see what happens. You actually need to act your way through. You need to learn your way through uncertainty and take small steps to get there. Absolutely the best example of this is what Eric Young did at Zoom. You know, they went from 10 million monthly active users to 200 million. They were actually adding 6,000 AWS servers a day through the pandemic as people were sort of coming onto their platform, but they fell short. The platform had issues, security risks, but he owned it. He got out there in front and sort of called out some of the problems that they were having, that people were Zoom bombing, that Facebook were scraping your Zoom information and reselling it without people's permission. They were, and they made the steps to try and improve it by taking lots of small steps and trying to ship things as frequently as possible. In fact, most people who use Zoom probably feel like they're shipping too frequently at the moment because the product changes so quickly, you know, but every week Eric is holding webinars talking about how they're trying to improve things, what's not working, how they could be better. And I think that's just a great example of, in the face of uncertainty, you learn your way through, you're transparent, own the issues, but respond with small steps to fix things. And I think at the end of the pandemic, I don't think anyone will even consider maybe what other video platforms and how important it's been to keep people connected. The other one is about action then, and then moving authority to the people closest to the information. So this is a really interesting, John Lagarde is the CEO of T-Mobile here in the US, and he took over the role in 2012. And at the time, you know, he did something very unique. He didn't sort of sit there and have PowerPoint presentations or listen to his team tell him what the problems were. He had a phone line installed in his office to listen to customer complaints. And he did it for 6 hours a day for the first 2 months of his job. And he used that because he wanted a direct line of raw feedback from customers to understand their problems. And on the back of it, he launched On Carrier, which was the first ever sort of bundled contract offering where you'd pay in $50 and get 500 megabytes of data, plus your data, plus your phone contract. You could cancel it at any time. It was a SIM-free account. They were the first people to ever bring it to market because he kept hearing the customers were struggling with understanding their bill and they wanted flexibility. And they obliterated the market, but up there, he kept actually more and more things. He let people try the iPhone free. He let people have a bundling of things like Spotify or music. All these they're the first person to do it. And they went from the 4th biggest telco in the US to the 3rd, buying the competitor above them. And telco is an interesting market. It's saturated. So you only win by taking other people's customers. And they're the only one that's growing in that very competitive market. But he just didn't stop there about a CEO making decisions and pushing them down. If you call if you call T-Mobile, you go straight through to their team of experts. And this team is very clear on the outcomes that they're responsible for. They have efficiency, like number of calls handled a day, average handling time, all their activity metrics. But the other important thing is they also own their business profitability metrics, customer satisfaction metrics, and they're allowed to make any decision that they want to help satisfy the customer problem they're facing. So you don't ring this team and ask or speak to their supervisor. They are the supervisor. If they want to give you a new phone, if they want to cancel your contract, give you a refund, they can all do it at frontline staff. So he's pushed all that authority right down to the front lines of the organization to solve problems. And they have the highest customer satisfaction scores out of any business in the United States, which is really saying something when you think about how customer service centric the market is. You know, and this isn't the only company doing it. You know, I had the honor of launching this book at AWS 2 years ago. Verizon and Amazon invited me to launch the book there. And, you know, one of the things that really struck me about Werner Vogel's keynote is that he talked about how Amazon source features. And 95% of their features are all built from direct customer feedback. Customer asks about what they want, and they use that information to both learn what people need and unlearn what's missing. And this is why this idea of it's so important to shift command to actually gain control. And yet many companies still hold on to the archaic command and control has to be done by one leader and pushing information down. And there's so many just great examples of this. You know, one of my favorites is when Hurricane Katrina struck in New Orleans, you know, they were out of electricity for a number of days and people were trying to get access to cash, but there was no way the ATMs could work because there was no power. But the manager of Liberty First Bank, his name is Mr. McDonald, you know, people were sort of coming to the door trying to get money. And he had no technology systems to back him up. So what he actually started doing was giving pieces of paper where people could write down their name and how much money that they were taking. And he would just give them the pieces of paper and the cash as a way of trusting people to do the right thing. And then they ended up getting up to $500 a day in the end. And they had a 97% payback rate. So it gives you a sense of like when you really push the information to people, they do the right thing. One of the other things that's really interesting to me is this company called Foldit. So when they were trying to solve vaccines for the pandemic, the way you create a vaccine is you need a protein that sort of mitigates or nullifies the vaccine. So Foldit is actually a game. People online can actually try and build proteins that would try and mitigate or neutralize the vaccine. And this is a way to try and create candidates potentially to test. So they created this online game and they had hundreds and thousands of people like trying to solve these puzzles because that's what it is. It's a puzzle. So you had people who were like nothing to do or anything to do with engineering actually trying to solve these problems. So you could imagine if, you know, if we had put the whole world trying to play this game instead of making TikTok dances and spending time on Twitter, what could have been achieved in the timeframes we could have scaled. So again, these are some of the kind of cool innovations that are really happening in the world. And I think it's important for people to start to, you know, think about really big about what's happening, but then start small about what actions you can take to try and get there. Look at the challenge you wrote down, see what people sort of need, or just take a small step to try and tackle it each day. You know, when I wrote this book, I didn't know what impact it would have, but then somebody sent me this photo of Serena Williams reading it before the Australian Open 2 years ago, which was pretty cool. If you've been inspired by this a little bit, you know, there's lots of ways to connect. You can listen to my podcast. I've had Chief Product Officer of Netflix, Kent Beck, who was one of the Agile Community Signers. I'm doing workshops in VR. It's cool. It's really fun, interesting to sort of work in different environments, get outside my comfort zone. You know, we're facing a rolling wave of pandemics. Even in Ireland, you've seen, you know, the first wave wasn't the worst, and it keeps coming back, and we're in the middle of winter. It'll keep coming back. So we need to have, you know, more and more skills to respond to these changing sort of circumstances, because COVID is just a public health issue. There's so many more issues that we've got to learn how to tackle and face together. But I believe if we can sort of think big, start small and learn fast, we can really tackle some of the really big issues that the world is facing, from poverty, hunger, and education. And there's so many things that would need to be tackled. But I think learning through this opportunity is a chance for us to get better and stronger together. So thank you very much for listening today, and I'll take a couple of questions and then obviously take more towards the end. So thanks.
Perfect. Barry, thank you so much. There's been quite a few comments there as well. People love the idea, particularly the example you gave of the CIO and switching roles for the day just to let people see. I think we often lose sight of that as well. It's so important to get a sense of what's happening in the business and across all different functions. That think big, start small. I mean, it is so pertinent. But a few people have asked, kind of looking there around maybe the speed of change. And I think, you know, we talk about unlearning and disruption and changing. And if we take even say a company like Airbnb, who nobody heard of them maybe 7 or 8 years ago, all of a sudden they became one of the biggest accommodation companies in the world. And yet you see the impact that COVID-19 has had. So whilst this disruption and unlearning and changing is great, and it looks to be part of what we're going to have to do indefinitely, it also brings a lot of challenges too, in terms of maybe things can just go belly up on you, unfortunately.
Yeah, look, but you know, the thing to understand with Airbnb though is they have a very narrow business model. They don't have a resilient business. They have maybe a disruptive business to the existing paradigm, like moving the seller to be the individual rather than a hotel, but they don't have optionality in their business. They don't have many services that they offer. So COVID just sort of highlighted, the weakness of their business model. So I think that where you have a company like Slack, where, you know, COVID accelerated their business because they have resiliency, they've optionality, they're built to be a communication hub for people who are distributed remotely, right? So I think there's a big difference between a disruptive idea and bringing it to execution and a resilient business model. And I think Airbnb is a classic example of maybe a disruptive idea, but not a resilient business model. And so they still managed to get $100 million or $1 billion valuation on their launch. So I don't know how they managed to do that, but we'll see how they go from there.
In the context of an accountancy company, this is a question from an attendee as well. How would you see change, or how could unlearning be applied in that? Again, like, I know there's sectors there where we've been told for the last 5 or 10 years, AI, etc., is going to take over, but yet these companies are still very much there. Where might you see unlearning being applied in that sector?
Yeah, so so accounting is sort of a interesting practice, right? Most of it is about reporting information after the fact. And in any companies I work in, when they're trying to get access to real-time information, is very challenging. The reason AI is not disrupting that market is in order for AI to be successful, you have to tag data and label it really well. And most companies don't even do that. They have their information in disparate systems. So putting it all together and synthesizing it, actually, it's still a difficult problem to solve. So what I would be thinking more about from an accounting point of view is to actually start with process changes that are more useful for flexibility in terms of your funding. So at the moment we work on annual budgeting, which was an idea introduced by McKinsey in 1907 when he was working with agricultural companies in the Midwest. You know, and the reason they plan it annually is because that was what the sort of farming cycle was. Now, the rate of change is much faster in technology than waiting annually for things to happen. You maybe need to think over a 1 or 2 year time horizon, but you should be having rolling waves of thinking about your planning cycles. So using the data that you gathered from the last month to inform the data, you know, what your plan for the next 12 months. And as you start creating that rolling system, smaller funding cycles, more reviewing of outcomes, understanding if your investments are performing as you expect, and have a rolling history of that. That's actually the innovation that needs to happen in financial management. And, you know, the simple example of this is the reason that high frequency traders ticker like on a share is as fast as you want to get it is because they're looking for feedback cycles to learn how the market is changing and then make investments based on how the market is changing. Right, so financial management actually operates at a high frequency of review and feedback when you're trading shares. But for businesses, most of them operate on the annual planning cycle with slow feedback loops. So you're just not going to win when you're facing a highly iterative and adaptive process versus a slow feedback cycle. And you know, that's why these companies sort of win, and that's where the process innovation has to happen there first.
Thank you. I'm conscious of the time, Barry, so I'm going to get you just to sit back for a few minutes, and I'm going to introduce Dr. Anne Cusack here, and we'll have a few minutes at the end as well for more questions. So our next speaker, and I suppose to give a case study as well, and I say it's a story of a lot of growth over the past couple of years, and quite interested to hear how this year has played a role in terms of development of critical healthcare. We're delighted to be joined by its chief executive and co-founder, Dr. Anne Cusack. In the past year, they have had a major move into new premises in Tullamore. The business was established in 2000 by Dr. Anne Cusack and Nhs Riley, and has become a leading specialist provider of frontline medical and healthcare products. So I'm going to skip the rest of the intro and go straight over to Dr. Anne Cusack. Anne, you're very welcome to the webinar.
Thanks very much, Ronan, and thanks to the LOETB for inviting me along this afternoon. I'm going to see if I can share a screen. Hopefully I don't get any technical glitches. You can let me know if this is going to.
Yep, seems to be working on. Yep, perfect.
Okay. So, as I said, thanks very much for inviting me along. I guess the objective behind me coming today was really to give you a snapshot of what we've been doing for the, I suppose, I won't go through the full 20 years, but certainly some of the challenges that we have faced, particularly over the last 10 months. And I did think that the title of the webinar was quite thought-provoking, to say the least. But I suppose for the most part, I would have thought that possibly it depends on the market that you're in. And for us, I guess this is a bit of a spoiler alert, but yes, COVID-19 has been an accelerant for us, for sure. So, but first, I'd really like to just say who we are, what do we do? We're here 21 years. We're a technology company that also manufactures a full range of medical consumables, medical devices, and PPE. And we deliver to Ireland, Europe, all within the emergency services. So who are the emergency services? Most of us just associate emergency services with ambulance, but actually it's really 5 different markets. It's ambulance, fire and rescue, police, army, security, and public works sectors that we would operate in. And in terms of our customers, I guess, what do we offer them? Well, we offer them an outsourced solution, and that's spread between Ireland, the UK, Germany, Denmark and Spain, with Poland, Sweden and France in the last 6 months in particular. And I suppose key to our expansion has been our contract with Falk, who are on that slide, who are the largest provider of emergency services globally. So why are they our customers? And I suppose I love the word disruption, and we've been using it for many years internally. We've done a number of things over the years to stay ahead and ensure that we future-proof our business. We've created our own range of Duramedic medical consumables. We've created a range of disposable linen, in particular Medi-Fleece, blankets and trolley sheets. And I suppose the key message around those has been infection control, which is of particular significance over the last year anyway. And then we also created and developed Medlogistics. And this really is, I suppose, our jewel in the crown, and it offers the ambulance services an opportunity really to manage all their stock procurement on a bespoke platform. So through this, we offer a fully managed service, which gives them access to products that the paramedics are trained on, so we're always compliant. It's a just-in-time delivery, so there's no more expired stock sitting in stations. And we also offer monthly reports, which gives them data on the product use by station and spend, etc. We've also reduced significantly the amount of administrative workload from purchase orders to sales invoices that they used to have to deal with. And out of all of that, we've demonstrated to the HSE that they save up to 37% of their procurement spend on an annual basis just by using Medlogistics. So in short, Medlogistics is all about the customer and giving them what they want when they want it, and how they need it. And that's really been our key differentiator over the years. But innovation, while it is key, nothing obviously happens overnight, which I was delighted to hear Barry say as well. And these are just some of the key milestones that have marked our journey to date. The first ambulance service tender came out in 2013, and that was when we were the first and single managed service provider to over 100 stations within Ireland. And this really opened the door to us into the UK, and we quickly signed up the 2 largest private emergency services providers with Medlogistics. And really, I suppose after that, we immediately started to look at how are we going to improve the software, as we knew that once that tender would be reissued, it would be hotly contested. And 2, Europe was really the big ticket item for us, and we knew that the current version of Medlogistics was going to need huge work if we were going to make it an option there. And fortunately, we accessed funding through Enterprise Ireland at the time for much needed R&D on that software. Then a key milestone for us was to get on the framework for the NHS tender, which represents 13 NHS ambulance trusts throughout the UK. So that really gave a huge foothold for us into that market and gave us the credibility that we needed to operate there, as well as some much needed revenue for our Duramedic consumables. By 2017, we had the version of Medlogistics that we have today, and that we could take out to a larger customer group. Interestingly, by then in 2018, Falk Europe was running a tender across all of Europe with 60 suppliers internationally. It took the full year, but by the end of 2018 and early 19, Critical Healthcare had secured the contract to roll out Medlogistics in Germany, Denmark, the UK and Spain. And then that brought us really into 2020. And for us, that the year was supposed to be focusing on us moving into new headquarters here in Tullamore. And really what we had decided on was we were going to knuckle down and just look at improving what we do. So working on the processes that we had in mind, but it didn't quite work out that way, as it turned out. These are just some of the images or visuals from 2019 that marked many of these events for us. One of them being the Department of Defence rescue of some of the unfortunate migrants off the coast of Libya. And obviously we supplied all the linen for that. Also the use of the linen in the NHS in the UK, Falk HQ, and then one of the iterations of our Medlogistics system where we launched a storage system using QR codes that linked to our platform. So this was us on March 4th, actually, as it turns out. So we were not at all ready to move in, but we had heard rumblings that things were afoot. So we pretty much over a 2-day weekend of March 6th, we got everybody on board and we just threw everything into vans and trucks and moved ourselves over to the new building that we're in today in Kilcrutton in Tullamore. So thankfully we got there just as Leo announced a lockdown on the 13th. For us, I suppose the impact of COVID-19 was very, very immediate for us. Our first challenge was just to stay open. As an essential service, we needed to ensure our staff were going to remain safe. Our core suppliers needed to be able to keep product coming into us, and we had to make sure that we could still supply those people on the front line across all our markets. I suppose one of the key challenges was around the supply chains, because in Europe, they were already under pressure by early March, as China had already shut for New Year in January, and then they didn't reopen because of COVID there. So already supplies were in short supply. But we had anticipated obviously the New Year closure, so we had already got quite a lot of stock in. And also because I suppose we had been planning for Brexit, which was supposed to have happened sooner rather than as it has turned out, and the fact that we were moving premises, we had built up quite a large supply of stock, and that really helped us in the long run. And from a customer perspective, it was really quite chaotic. And the services across Ireland, the UK, Europe immediately started to double the quantities of stock that they wanted. And whilst we had it, the level of activity put huge pressure on our staff, not to mention the huge pressure on cash flow. And that was very tight for a long time. PPE orders had just climbed exponentially. As demand increased, so did our prices, and many orders coming in were many orders that we wanted to make to manufacturers were had gone to prepaid in order to guarantee delivery. So that was a lot of stress. And the other big issue was around transport costs, as product, you know, everybody wanted to get their product out of China, and they were holding auctions on the runways, literally just as they were ready to take off. So that again was quite intense. And then there was the quality of the PPE. I suppose, you know, we had orders in, for example, from the ambulance service, and then they were cancelling it because the HSE had said that they were bringing in shipments. And then when that arrived and the quality was substandard, then they wanted it back again, but we'd already sold it on. So there was a lot of anxiety across the board, and the key thing was to maintain the quality of the product that was coming in. Internally, in order for us to stay open, we initiated some changes immediately. So, for example, we introduced 2 warehouse shifts, so that the teams could continue to work in pods. We closed the warehouse to everybody except those that needed to be there. Fortunately, the building is big enough, as it turned out, so that we could implement social distancing across all the offices and indeed the canteen and the warehouse. Those who weren't able to come into work, we set them up to work remotely, and we recruited extra staff really across the board, but primarily in the warehouse. We also initiated a huge supply chain project during the summer, because we knew that coming into the winter pressures and what that would bring, that we needed to really reevaluate how we were managing our stock and ensuring that we had safety stock levels built in. That was kind of the impact. And I suppose for us significantly, what we were proud of is that both the National Ambulance Service of Ireland and Denmark have remained fully operational, with sufficient supplies during the full summer and into the winter. So we're really proud of that and of the team. The opportunities, well, luckily we had moved into this premises, so we have the capacity to continue to scale, and we've taken another 10,000 square feet at the end of this business park, so we still have further space. The emergency services for the most part is still business as usual, except that the volumes are much bigger as the surges continue across Europe. So the opportunity for us is to really keep improving, or to try and keep improving and doing what we are doing. We are continuing to access new markets, both in Ireland and in particular in the UK at the moment. We have just won a contract with London Ambulance Service that we will initiate in January. We won the tender, or part of the tender, with the Department of Education in August to supply schools. And we also started serving the guards and prison service earlier in the summer. We then, we went into partnership with Roche to distribute the rapid COVID test, which is in huge demand in Denmark again, where their numbers are escalating. And I suppose the key for us has been around recruiting, and ensuring that we have the right people in the right place. And so there's been a big focus on regulatory. Excuse me. People talk to me about the new normal and what is the new normal. And I suppose for us, again, it's about maintaining our customer base and ensuring that we do what we need to do to make sure that they have everything that they need at the front line. But I suppose for us, in offering a managed service to our customers, we recognize that about 80% of our business is digitalized through Medlogistics. So for us, the future is about ensuring that our online and our offline messages correlate, and to make sure that our customer service is as fantastic online as it is offline. And I think this is probably something that applies to all business communities, because we're all expecting people to be online. Again, our priority is about keeping our staff safe, and we're doing whatever we can in order to ensure that we continue to do that. And we're still planning for Brexit. Our challenges, well, they're listed there, but I suppose specifically for us, our challenges are about investing in the next rebuild of Medlogistics, which we have just started, and we've just recruited a head of IT. We've just completed a strategic marketing review during the summer to identify key areas of development so that we can remain competitive and build our online presence in new markets. We're continuing to invest in lean across the entire organization, but particularly in logistics and our warehouse, so that we can facilitate expansion. And we are investing in new product development so that we can expand the range of Duramedic products that we have. So 10 months on, what have we learned over the last 10 months? A couple of things: communication. And I suppose with what we have found is communication is key, not only, and that's not new, with staff, with our customers, with our suppliers, all the stakeholders, essentially. Everyone needs to know what's happening and what's not. The second key learning was to really mind the cash flow and know exactly what's coming in and what needs to go out. And also to utilize the supports that are there, whether it's funding from EI or the LEOs, the training supports of the ETBs. Prioritize what is needed and go for it. And believe in what you are doing. Stick with it as long as you know, as long as you have a clear vision of what success needs to look like, or what you want success to look like. And I suppose lastly, it's to build a senior team, because you cannot do it all by yourself. And so that takes time, but it needs to be done right. We found the last 10 months really to have accelerated our growth at probably twice the pace we had anticipated and planned for. But having said that, we have a lot of processes. We're very process driven. So that has certainly helped to put ballast on the ship, I guess. Our staff numbers have increased to 34 from about 21 this time last year. Our revenue has doubled, but our stock has doubled, so our costs have definitely increased. We like to think of ourselves as flexible, and this period has certainly tested us. Is COVID a disruption? I think in the positive sense for us, yes, it has definitely been a disruption, but we've certainly had to up our game, and therefore it has definitely accelerated us into, I guess, the direction we were heading anyway, but just a little bit quicker. So that's our story. Thanks for having me. I think I would like to say we're proud of what we do here, being at the front line. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. And again, it's just it's such a fascinating and insightful story too. And I love as well, like the message is still, it's simple message too. I liked what you said about your customer service online. It should be the same as what it is offline. It's such a simple point, but I think that's what a lot of companies are striving for now. And certainly the last 10 months are pushing people towards that. A question, if I may, around, we talk about disruption, innovation. How do you, in critical healthcare, how do you kind of create a culture of innovation and to get, the new ideas into the company?
Through our customers, to be perfectly honest, Ronan. We talk a lot to our customers, and I suppose because we have quite a close relationship with most of them, and we make it our business to have a lot of conversation with them. In the earlier days, it was easier because it was might have been Seamus or myself would have just naturally been speaking to them. that obviously has become an awful lot more difficult. So now we've had to put things in place where now we have communication meetings with our customers to try and ensure that that line of communication isn't lost. It definitely becomes more difficult as we've got bigger.
And do you use any, like, is it software? How do you go then about capturing those ideas and actually logging them? Is it at that stage now that as the team expands?
Yeah, that's exactly where it is now, is that we have started that process of logging it, discussing it, whereas before it would have been, you know, we were all in the same room anyway, so it wasn't as big a deal. But now we are logging it and now we discuss it.
Yeah, certainly it is a year that, like your piece there about having to kind of react quickly to move to the new premises. And it's also fantastic to see the old buildings being completely repurposed again. There's a lovely little kind of a circular piece in that as well. You mentioned though, introducing lean into the business, a great way of actually looking at every aspect, Rick, from the customer right down to how you do things. How long have you, when did you start that journey, and what have been the kind of key learnings from that already?
Yeah, we started it probably over 2 years ago, actually. We've had a number of key learnings, and because we're applying it right across the organization, it's been very beneficial in all departments. So I suppose it was important from a cultural point of view. It was something probably, again, when we were smaller, we weren't aware that culture was something that, you know, you had to keep an eye on as we got bigger. So certainly we've been far more aware of that and getting teams involved in having various inputs into what we do. I think key to what lean has done for us over the last year has been within the warehouse. We had been measuring the length of time it took somebody to pick a full order, which was 44 minutes, and we've got it down to 14 minutes. So, you know, it has had a huge impact on our efficiencies and on cost. And, we're nowhere near where we need to be. So it's very much an ongoing process.
And a final question for you, based on what Barry spoke about there, is there any things that you think you yourself need to unlearn in the 12 months ahead?
So much. But I feel I've made the first step. I'm out of my comfort zone doing this on Zoom. So step one done.
Yeah, it doesn't show at all. And actually there's loads of messages coming in there from sort of people you know and people you don't know, actually saying, like, you know, it's great to hear the story as well. People have really enjoyed it, and it has been a key part as well of getting those case studies. Everybody, I'm very conscious of the time. We are getting towards the end. I think both speakers have been so engrossing. People really are taking a lot of notes from this too. The video will be shared. If anybody's any final questions, feel free, pop them into the Q&A. But I think given the time, I think we'll wrap it up for this evening. It has been absolutely fascinating. The video of the webinar will be available in the coming days, again, once the team get it ready there and have it up. If you want more content from Barry, you can go to barryoreilly.com/newsletter. Sign up there. You can continue to get stuff from Barry, and you can do the same with critical healthcare, obviously. The next webinar in this series, so here's a date for your diary for, dare we say, 2021. It is the Wednesday, the 13th of January at 4 p.m. Is the next webinar. Sorry, Wednesday the 13th at 4 p.m. The topic will be motivation and innovation during changing times. Guest speaker on the day will be Breja Larson. She's an Olympic athlete, and she really kind of tells a great story as well about that high performance and maintaining that high performance mentality. She speaks openly as well about maybe sometimes when you don't hit the heights that you're expecting and how you kind of rebound and get back as well. Our case study on the day will be Emmett Quintana from EQ Strength and Conditioning. So the series will continue. Thank you all once again for taking time out this evening to join us on the series. I know the team really appreciate it. Any feedback you'd like to give the LOETB, be it through LinkedIn or social media, is also greatly appreciated too. And the number of registrations are going up each week. The conversions to actually people here in front of the screen, it's great to see, because we saw the figures Barry had about Zoom, and we're all possibly zoomed out, but it takes a lot for people to actually take the time to come on to a Zoom call. From everybody at the LOETB, I suppose to wish everybody a happy Christmas and all the absolute best for 2021. And thank you again. We look forward to seeing you all on the 13th, and a huge thank you again to Barry O'Reilly and to Anne Cusack for joining us this evening. Thank you. Goodbye.